Hey viewers and viewresses, my name is General Red Strategist, welcome back to So You're Being Hunted. This is episode 299, we're back here on the same world actually as the previous episode, for another podcast style episode. Obviously, the thing is, with this being episode 299 and all that, episode 300 will be coming next, and that is going to be, of course, a bit of a special, since we're, hitting another 100 milestone, basically. You know the drill, me and Phil are going to be doing basically a Q&A inside So You're Being Hunted for that 300th episode. So make sure you tune in for that then, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to say that right now at the start of this video. Just bear in mind that obviously by the time this episode goes out on the channel, it's highly likely that me and Phil will have recorded episode 300. So in terms of questions, things like that, if you do leave any on this video, just bear in mind chances are it won't get answered in episode 300. I mean, I've already accumulated an absolute ton of them, so me and Phil have more than enough material to keep us going. So any questions that do obviously get left on this video, though, well, it's highly likely they'll probably actually just be reserved, maybe for a future Q&A video, whenever I get around to doing that or whatever. Because that's the thing, for my initial Q&A I did, well, not my initial one, because I've done ones before that, but for the Q&A I did not too long ago, of course, what I did with that one was, I used up all the questions that people had sent me prior to when me and Phil recorded that video, but there were other ones which people left which we weren't able to answer, so some of those will be answered this time around, and like I say, I can always save any others for a future video perhaps. But yes, that's not the main topic that I wanted to talk about in today's podcast style episode of So You're Being Hunted. So yeah, but I just decided it was worth kind of reminding everyone about it in case anyone's forgotten. Not that I think people had forgotten about it. So yeah, stay tuned for that then, ladies and gents. No, main topic of conversation that I actually wanted to talk about, because I don't know, it's something fairly interesting. You know me, how I sometimes come across YouTube channels that I've never watched before, things like that. Phil was actually telling me, because I mentioned Outside Xbox and Outside Extra, whichever one it was, pretty recently, and Phil, he got in contact with me and was like, Red, or Andrew rather, because he doesn't actually call me Red, he calls me Andrew by first name, because first name basis and all that. He was, he was sat there and he was going, Andrew, how have you not heard about these people before then? They've been around for ages. Well, I'm almost like an old man, okay, who's only just discovering what's hip and down with the kids these days for the first time. I can't know everything, alright? But, yes. Okay, but, no, but like I say, I come across various YouTube channels that I really enjoy watching. Because usually when I come across one that I really like, or rather I come across one for the first time and I really like its content, I usually end up kind of binge watching a load of stuff that they have on their channel. That's what I did with Outside Xbox and Outside Extra. I watched a load of their list type videos, things like that, and they've got interesting content, but they're not the channel actually I was going to talk about in today's video. The channel I actually wanted to talk about is an interesting one. It's not to do with gaming, it's a completely different topic, subject area. I'll tell you the name of the channel, and then I'll tell you, of course, what its videos are typically about. But before I tell you the second of those two things, have a little guess in your own head at what you think this channel is all about. Hint, it is not what the channel name might immediately suggest it's about. So the channel name is Mustard, ladies and gentlemen, Mustard. Now, of course, you probably listen to that and you'll think, sounds like it's maybe about culinary stuff, food, whatever. But of course, as I said, the channel name is not actually what the subject matter is at all. So no, it's not about food or anything like that at all. So the actual subject of the Mustard channel is all to do with kind of like aviation and engineering and things like this, and it's just a really interesting channel. And now I didn't come across it in the last few days, I actually came across it a few weeks ago, but like I say, it's one of those channels which when I discovered it, I just started fucking binge watching all of its content. So the guy who makes it, he has a really kind of clear presenting voice. It's just all round very nice to watch, because like I say, he's got a very clear presenting voice, the guy who narrates Mustard videos, but on top of that, what makes them just really pleasurable to watch is the fact that not only is the subject matter kind of interesting if you're into things like engineering and aviation and things like that, but also because some of the subjects of his videos are kind of technologies which either only got to prototype stages or which maybe never even came about. Obviously, that means, there's not a lot of historical imagery or footage of them out there. So instead, he often uses these custom-made animations, and some of them, I don't know, they're just really satisfying to watch, really beautiful, things like that. So, if you're into things like the history of aviation technology, not just aviation technology, but basically anything to do with kind of transport, logistics, and engineering. So, like things like railways, ships, the history of the kind of engineering behind those, go and check it out. It's very, very interesting. But like I say, most of the videos of his that I've watched are to do with aviation engineering, things like that. So there's like ones on, for example, types of aircraft which were quite innovative, which, like I say, they were innovative because of their design, but which for various reasons maybe never became commercially viable or whatever. So one of the most recent ones that I watched, for example, in fact, actually, I watched it just before recording this video, was about a Dornier vertical takeoff and landing transport aircraft that was basically in development in the 60s, and fascinating. It was just fascinating to hear about it because, of course, VTOL was such a kind of revolutionary technology when it came out. The idea that you could take a jet aircraft and give it the power to actually take off and land without the need for a runway. Because of course, that was a thing that was very much born out of a Cold War context. The threat of a war with the Soviet Union, where rapid surgical strikes, particularly against airfields and runways, would potentially just obliterate the space that conventional jets needed in order to operate, at least to take off and land at. So, the whole idea of VTOL was to kind of solve that potential problem. So there, you have jet fighters and aircraft that have no need for runways. So therefore, if the Soviet Union bombs runways, or vice versa, if we were doing it to the Soviets, because the Soviets had their own, VTOL research projects. The idea being that, just destroying the runways of someone's airfields wouldn't necessarily do you a lot of good. But it's just, it's fascinating stuff, essentially. So there was that one that I watched, but, other videos I watched are about things like McDonnell Douglas aircraft, also about kind of those, what do you call them, like commercial airliners, but they have 3 rather than just 2 engines, because I'm not describing that very well at all, actually, because now I think about it, you can get commercial aircraft with 4 engines. I mean, 3-engined commercial aircraft where they have 2 engines mounted beneath the wings, and then a 3rd engine mounted, sort of built into the tail fin where the rudder is located. I remember watching a video about those, why they perhaps are not, why they just ultimately didn't prove viable. Other ones that I watched, Saunders Row Princess, I think it was called. He's got a video on that. Saunders Row Princess was like a flying boat. That's another really fascinating technology that was very much of its time, back in like the sort of 30s, 40s, 50s, flying boats, basically aircraft that were designed to take off and land on water. Because they're just interesting because the thing is, with those kind of aircraft, at one time, that may have actually been seen as the kind of future of aviation and commercial airliners, things like that. But of course then, I think you had like World War II, for example, which put a huge need for the development of airfields and whatever else had you, led to massive advances in conventional sort of runway utilising aircraft. And thus maybe kind of those sort of flying boats just fell out of fashion because they weren't really needed. But if you look at pictures of the Saunders Row Princess, it's really quite a beautiful looking aircraft, I must say. Just let me go to this shoreline, please. I'm trying to talk about flying boats. There you go, thank you very much, Sea Beast. Very considerate of you. Have you ever seen any flying boats, my friend? Yes. But other sort of fantastic machines which he has done videos on. He's also done a history video about the development of Japan's Shinkansen, the bullet trains, which is fascinating to kind of learn about, the way they developed and the kind of engineering thought processes that went into their design. Because of course for the Shinkansen bullet trains, Japan obviously had to create a whole new series of railway lines for them. Because the thing about high-speed trains is, if you have existing track, which was built for slower trains, then usually the tracks and things like that will be very twisted and windy. And of course that's not very good for high-speed locomotives. Because of course, if they're moving at great speed, that creates a potential challenge for them. Okay, I'm just going to have to take these assholes out. Or maybe not. Hold on, let me just drink some of that there we go. Take another bottle, please. Oh. Get out of there, you bastards. These guys are kind of on their own. Oh, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to have to deal with these assholes, I think, probably. If I can get close enough to this thing before... Oh no, they're going to see me. Nope. Okay, they've seen me. Oh, and he took out his friend. Yes. Sorry, I'm just concentrating on what I'm doing at the moment. Get out of here. There we are. Lovely. Yes. Okay, so yeah, you must have did a video on, obviously, the Shinkansen, which was very fascinating to watch. Thoroughly enjoyed it myself. But, you know, he's done videos, for example, on a similar vein on railways about things like the Francis TGV, also the Advanced Passenger Train, which was a UK development back in the back in the 70s and 80s. The Advanced Passenger Train, of course, was one of Britain's earliest attempts at developing a high-speed train, which wouldn't actually, well, in theory it was supposed to be able to run on Britain's existing railway tracks without the need for the development of completely new ones. So it was going to be Britain's kind of answer to the likes of the French TGV or the Japanese Shinkansen, but of course it didn't quite work out as intended, because apparently the problem with it was, well, I'll sort of kind of give an overview of its history. So the idea was that the problem with Britain was that a lot of its existing railway track had obviously been laid down in the Victorian era, and it had been laid down for steam locomotives, which were slower, and so as a result, kind of Victorian railway tracks tended to be very twisty, very windy, basically not suitable for high-speed modern locomotives, because of course with those kind of sharp bends and things like that, a high-speed locomotive trying to take those would instantly fucking derail itself. But the Advanced Passenger Train, the idea behind that was they would develop the company in charge of developing it would develop a system that would enable it to be able to take sharp bends and corners without derailing itself. So the solution was to create a train that kind of tilts into the corner. So you know how like motorcyclists, you know, in say like motorbike races, when they go around bends, they sort of lean into the corner. That was the idea. What they do with the APT, the Advanced Passenger Train, they'd have something similar, kind of similar principle for that one. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out because it basically gave its passengers motion sickness. But what was actually quite funny from what I remember in that Mustard video about the APT was that he'd found some old like British news report footage, whatever it was, of a reporter sat on one of the APTs as it was moving and talking about how smooth a ride it was. But what was so funny about this video was that as he was talking about how smooth the ride was, you could see he had a cup of tea on the sort of table in front of him in this carriage, and this cup of tea was rattling like crazy. So it was like, really smooth, my friend? Doesn't look it. Yeah, fascinating, eh? I just like I say, I loved those Mustard videos, and they're so good. You should check them out. But another, actually, on a kind of related sort of theme to that, there is another channel which is very similar to Mustard. Again, it's probably been around a long time, but I also kind of discovered it recently, and it's a very, like I say, it's a very similar kind of subject area. A lot of it is to do basically with engineering, aviation technology, like big sort of transportation engineering, things like this. Curious Droid, who I think is a British presenter, because Mustard is American, I believe. But Curious Droid, you know, he has some fascinating videos on similar subjects that I've watched. So, for example, I think he did one on the Chronoplan, or the Caspian Sea Monster, which was basically this really quite fascinating Soviet idea. Basically, they built this it looks like an aeroplane, but it's not. What it is it's a ground effect vehicle. The idea being that it's designed to skim over the skim several meters over the surface of the ocean, really, really fast at high speed, creating lift as it does, which keeps it just above. And it's just fascinating. You can find pictures of the Caspian Sea monster, as it's called, the Lund class chronoplan, I think it is, on Google. I mean, you literally just search a chronoplan and you'll find it. But that was an interesting one. Another one that Curious Droid actually did, which I thought was quite a fascinating one, was about the what were they called? The big. Oh god, I've completely forgotten what the technical name for them was. Any British viewers of this? Do you remember? I think it was hover speed. Hover speed, that might have been it. Hover speed back in the, well, I think from the sort of 60s to the 90s or so. Hover speed was a company that used to run these massive hovercraft services between Dover and Calais, basically ferries. But the hovercraft that they used were quite notable designs. I think they were among some of the biggest hovercraft in the world, biggest commercial hovercraft. The idea being that not only would they ferry passengers, they were also designed to be roll on, roll off, so you could take cars and vehicles onto them. And whilst I personally can't remember this myself because I was very young at the time, I have seen photographs that my old folks, my parents, actually took back in the 90s on like a family trip where we were down south on the south coast of England, and they actually saw one of these things, these big giant hovercraft coming in to dock, and they took like pictures of it. I think they may have even taken like video of it on like a really old 90s video camcorder. I think. Like I said, I can't remember exactly. I'd have to actually ask them and see if maybe they remember that and if they actually do indeed have that. God, man, because if they do, I'd love to watch that again. Yeah, again, you can find videos of this probably on YouTube. You know, obviously apart from Curious Droids, you'll probably find other videos people have made. You won't be surprised, in fact, if people who maybe back in the 90s maybe took like old camcorder footage of them, and then probably, you know, as the years passed, transferred it maybe over to like DVD formats, things like that, and then transferred it onto computers. They probably, you know, uploaded it to YouTube, and you can probably find it, actual first-hand footage of people utilising those old hovercraft. Man. But yeah, like I say, it's just a really interesting subject, at least to me it was. So yeah, check out Mustard, check out Curious Droid. Fascinating stuff that they have on their channels. Oh man. It's funny really, because one thing I will say about those videos is, well, not all of them, but some of them, it does certainly bring out a lot of people who kind of wear nostalgia glasses, so to speak. So you'll see a lot of people in the comments on their thing, you know, whining about how, you know, people aren't as innovative anymore. People don't build, you know, technologies like these things anymore, things like this. And I must say, speaking, you know, on a kind of deeper, more personal level, you know, I sometimes think there's a lot of pessimism in the world about, you know, people thinking that we're not innovative, that humankind just isn't very innovative as a species anymore, that, you know, we don't dream big or anything like this. And I have to say, I really disagree with that mindset, because usually when people say these kinds of things, they're very focused on particular areas of human progress and advancement. Like in those instances, people tend to look for big examples of progress, big novel technologies, which actually in the grand scheme of history maybe are not that significant precisely because they're novel. Things like that. Apologies if I've talked about this before. I can't actually remember if I have. I feel like now that I'm talking about this, I feel like maybe I've talked about something similar to this, or maybe, you know, this exact thing. But, you know, it's a thing that it just gets me a little bit when people say that humans are not as, you know, innovative, or, you know, they don't dream as big as they did back in like the 50s or the 60s. So I think, no, that's just you looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles, probably because you were alive back then, and thus your view of it is perhaps biased by sentiment or whatever. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, just bear that in mind. But, you know, the world as we know it today, there's plenty of innovation and science and incredible things going on. It's just maybe not taking place in, the same kind of fields that it was in the 50s or the 60s. There's researchers out there doing fantastic pioneering work in things like information technology, in medicine, stuff like that. So there's a lot of reason, I think, to be optimistic about the future, in spite of, all the problems that we face today, whether that's, environment and climate, whether that's economic woes or whatever, current, continual poverty in certain parts of the world. I still think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, but yeah. But maybe that's just my view on things. Whatever. Yeah. Okay. Well, tell you what. I've had a right good talk about that subject now, so I'm just going to wrap up here. I do think, because I think I think we've been recording there for about at least 10 minutes, which is probably enough for a So You're Being Hunted video, especially a podcast style episode like this. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that, everybody. And like I say, go check out those channels I mentioned, Mustard and also Curious Droid, if you're interested in things like a bit of history to do with technology and engineering and stuff like that, because they're really fascinating. But other than that, thank you everybody, and I hope you're all getting hyped up for the 300th episode coming soon. Like I say, by the time this video goes out, me and Phil will probably have recorded it. And any questions that do get left from here on out, if they're not covered in the 300th episode, I'll probably keep them on my computer for a future Q&A. So yeah, there you go, everybody. Facebook and Twitter links down below, as always, along with a link to my propagandist channel if you're interested in that kind of thing that I do on there, which is basically anime, and in particular Girls on Panzer. But I need to really put more stuff out on there. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. Maybe share my videos with your friends on social media. But in the meantime, I'm going to sign off now. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, hello. Are you the humpback whales that we saw earlier in the playthrough? And I look like it. Oh. Whoa! That's a frigging blue whale and a half. Bloody hell, that's big. Now I get a sense of perspective. Zooming out, holy shit. Good God. The music could not be more fitting. Wow. How deep are we going?